And
Hmm.
one thing also I should mention on these dates, if you have an appointment scheduled, you should make every effort to appear at that interview. And I would advise you not to reschedule unless there is no other choice, because as you can see, somebody that had visa availability and decided to reschedule their case for a later period, say they wanted to reschedule till the kids were out of school or whatever, in a matter of convenience, they got caught blindsided. And we used to see this when I was chief often with the Chinese applicants. They would reschedule for summer months to avoid having to process their case in the spring or whatever. And sometimes you get caught up in this type of retrogression. So again, keep your interview. And if by any chance you are ever refused, try to overcome that refusal in the month of original interview, because there would be a number available for you if you can do so.
Okay, that's a good point.
I mean, that's a great
Yeah, we
point. Yeah,
can't.
especially when we talk about, yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Pete.
No, no. I mean, we led off this conversation talking about how the bulletin can be a little bit more dynamic than it used to be, and this is obviously not something that you would ever expect to have happen. And hopefully, this is the type of one-time type of adjustment that needed to be made when there is a further review of the bulletin and the numbers that we needed for the rest of the world. But the idea that waiting a month or waiting a couple of months could have this kind of impact really speaks to, again, how dynamic things have been and how important it is to move forward as quickly as possible in terms of getting allocated your actual number.
Yeah, and I'm going to say something. Which I think there's also been a little bit of change in how the Visa Bulletin does their projections, maybe since Charlie left. That is a little bit plays into that a little bit more, whereas they push it forward, the date forward a little bit more, and to generate that demand just to move it backwards. I know, Charlie, you've kind of talked about how you would sort of do it on like a month-to-month basis and see what demand is actually generated. It's just sort of a different philosophy, so to speak. And I'm not saying one's wrong or better. I'm just saying it's a different way of doing it and why we're seeing more of the bounce back or bounce around.
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, I mean, it's better to go slowly and, advance steadily than have these ping pong effects, which they've been having more in the recent years.
Yeah. Yeah. But
Yeah,
it's part
the
of that.
management
I think
is really hard.
Please go ahead. Sorry.
No, but no, we talk about all the time of managing people's expectations and trying to give people reasonable ones for when they can move forward. And I think this definitely speaks to that. And maybe it just speaks to being used to the way Charlie had done it, running this for as long as he had. There was a consistency. And again, it's not to say that there is something wrong, or it's just a different methodology of how it's handled. And so that is one that takes a little bit more getting used to.
Yep. Yep. So I think if we go to the
Well,
next slide, it talks about, so this was in last month's Visa Bulletin, the one for this year, and sort of what was the impetus for us to do another webinar was them saying, hello, wait a second. Yeah, we are going to potentially need to have a final action date for the rest of world for the unreserved category. And that's not something that has ever happened before, I don't believe. Right, Charlie?
Correct. There's never been a rest of world date. And I think that this note indicates the fact that they're saying we may need to impose a rest of world date is they used far more numbers for India and China than they had expected, and they should not have done so at the expense of rest of world applicants who had not had numbers available under their per country limits. So my concern is that they may actually run out of numbers, hit the overall annual limit before the end of the fiscal year, and may need to impose a rest of world date, possibly at the end of the summer, but this would only be a temporary issue. And then the category would go back of October. And an easy way for you to think about this is the annual limits are like your household budget, and you're making a monthly budget for your housing expenses, insurance, whatever you may have, and you only have a total amount of money to use through September. And unfortunately, the State Department, when they were doing their quote budget, they overextended themselves.
Right. And now last fiscal year, they used all of the unreserved visa numbers as well. The difference is that here it's happening earlier in the year potentially, and it's happening, it's stopping everyone from around the world as opposed to just from a couple of countries.
Correct. And last year, the fact that they hit the limit was primarily due to the amount of China and Indian numbers they were used in combination with the rest of the world, but the rest of the world stayed current. That's kind of flip-flopping this year.
Got
But
it.
again, even people should not be concerned if there is a rest of world unreserved date imposed at some point before September. That should only be a temporary issue, with the rest of world going back to being current for October.
That's a great point that I think everyone really needs to hear if you're from rest of world is, don't be surprised if and when you do have an appointment cancellation because of this issue later on. And I think to some extent, the damage has already been done because the visa numbers have already been given out to China and India, potentially more than they were supposed to. And yes, that will be impacting rest of world, but only for a short period of time. Come October, it's going to go back and open back up. So it's a short-term issue, but not a long-term problem. The other thing that I thought
Yeah.
was sort of interesting here is the goal, I think, is to maximize rest of world unreserved data number use, right? That's the goal. And so the more that you can clear that out now this year, that means, and I guess this is sort of your point earlier, Charlie, is like there's more visas in future years that can be used to reduce the backlog for China or for Indians.
Yeah, I would think that the fact that they have retrogressed India and China, as I mentioned, they should be able to accommodate the vast majority of pending rest of world demand and finalize action on those cases this fiscal year.
I mean, and that's not a small number. It's like 6,000. I mean, it's a big number of people who are still waiting. They filed before 2022, potentially before 2019, still waiting for their consular interviews. That number needs to be reduced significantly, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think they will be able to reduce that number by at least 5,000 numbers at a minimum.
Well, Marco Rubio, I hope you're
Yeah.
listening, because we definitely need those numbers to be used.
Yeah. And yeah, working through them in an orderly fashion. I think having the correction that was made allows for everything. It's almost kind of making sure that everything as things go forward, that things are able to move forward at a much more efficient in a much more efficient manner, even if there was a bumpiness in the way that the retrogression had to come to India and China to get there.